Welcome to Atomic Life. Kurt Havens, and we're back with Nicholas Weir. And today we were going to talk about the difference between natural and enhanced lifters when it comes to training and diet and things associated with that. Because I think nowadays there's a lot of people making absolute statements with training intensity, training volume. And the problem is the natural status of someone is really going to affect the outcome here. So it doesn't mean that everyone needs to train the same. Although all muscles will respond to the same stimulus, the technique to get there is not going to be the same for both of these groups. And food is not necessarily going to be the same. Recovery is not going to be the same. And it just requires a different level of pretty much everything that goes into it. So the first one we were going to talk about was who needs to train more frequently. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I'll dive into it, and then obviously you throw your few cents on it as well. So who needs to train more frequently? Again, it depends, and I know people hate that answer. Like, people absolutely hate it when I say it depends, but I'm sure you'd agree with me, Kurt. Like, it's true. It's the true. Like, there's no absolutes. Like we were kind of discussing a little bit before we started this episode, and it's very context specific. But I mean, you can look at it this way. If you're a drug-free person and natural person, you can't get away with as much. Like, basically, the parameters are tighter for you when it comes to training, nutrition, all that sort of stuff. So if you're drug-free, you've been a lifetime drug-free, or you've been drug-free for several years, then you're not going to have the same recoverability as an enhanced lifter. There's also a number of other factors, like your neural drive isn't going to be as efficient. Like, your ability to learn motor patterns, your ability to adapt to movements isn't going to be as good. So you're going to find that you can't get away with as much. And I mean, as a drug-free lifter, I think when you start to become a little bit more experienced, not super advanced, but more intermediate level, you can handle more frequency, you can train more frequently. But I think as a complete novice, I do like the stance that Menno Henselmans takes, and that is a bro split's actually advantageous for somebody just starting out, somebody who's completely green, because you look at it this way. Muscle growth is an adaptive response to stress. It's a stress response, essentially. So we apply mechanical tension to the body, and the stress response from the body is to hypertrophy the tissue so it's more resilient to that kind of stress in the future. And so as you become more experienced, or as you lift from a novice into that intermediate stage, you become more well equipped and able to handle that stress from training. And so your muscle protein synthesis will start to peak and drop at a quicker rate. So initially, when you're a beginner, MPS is elevated longer, similar to how an enhanced lifter has an elevated muscle protein synthesis for a longer period of time. But then as you become more experienced, more trained, that starts to kind of taper off, and you get this more aggressive peak and drop. And so I think if you're a complete novice, you don't have to train as frequently. If you're an intermediate to advanced lifter, you probably have to train more frequently. And then when you're enhanced, you don't have to train as frequently, but you'll get away with it because you can recover more. So, I mean, to answer that question, me personally, I think intermediate to advanced natural drug-free lifter needs to lift more frequently, hit a body part more often. Complete green novice lifters or enhanced lifters don't have to train as frequently.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
So my take on it is protein synthesis is elevated around the clock for someone who's on drugs versus the exercise is a stimulus to elevate protein synthesis in a natural lifter. So whereas someone that's on drugs can lift less, right? And this is elevated all the time. So there's going to be an adaptive response that's occurring around the clock. An enhanced lifter also is just using the workout basically to drive the mechanical tension is still needed, but it's also used to drive the nutrients into the muscles because we're eating more, versus a natural lifter basically has to use each workout to stimulate protein synthesis. But volume and intensity are inversely related, right? So this is, I think, the big argument right now is everyone's going back and forth between what's more important. Well, mechanical tension is the driver of growth. There is a minimum amount of volume needed in order to have that adaptation, but volume in and of itself is not the driver. It doesn't make any sense. It's like saying gasoline is what moves the car. The engine was to move the car, There's a required amount of gasoline that has to go in for the engine to work. But yeah, I mean, I think as long as they're limiting the overall amount of sets, they should probably be hitting things slightly more frequently so they can continue to, make progress. What about cardio? This is kind of a tricky one. So who would need more cardio, an enhanced lifter or a natural lifter?
Oh, that's tricky. I think enhanced lifter wouldn't need cardio as much because they can leverage things like drugs, which is a complete additional variable that drug-free lifters don't have at their disposal. But in saying that, I do think that drug-free lifters can leverage an increase in step count more to their advantage to help offset the need to lower calories as frequently. So, I mean, I think enhanced lifters get away with being able to do more cardio, but they don't necessarily need more cardio. Drug free lifters do need more cardio because the only two variables they can manipulate in order to strip body fat off their frame is essentially increase energy expenditure, energy output, and preserve lean body mass by eating adequate protein and staying in a calorie deficit. So, I think, yeah, drug free lifters need more cardio.
Yeah, from a physique point of view, definitely, I agree. From a health point of view, though, I think it's the opposite. I
Yeah,
think when you
definitely.
leverage things, especially some of the more atrocious things like orals and some of the more toxic compounds, I just think an enhanced lifter, from a health point of view, probably should at least get a higher step count just to keep their cardiovascular system healthy and things moving properly. But yes, from an aesthetics point of view, enhanced lifters have a lot more tools in their toolbox to get body fat down without doing cardio. What
Yeah.
about lifting volume? Who needs more lifting volume?
Who needs more lifting volume?
I can give you my
I'd,
stand first if you want. If it's
yeah, I suppose, yeah. You
um,
give your stance first, yeah,
what,
because
and it
I've
was
got a little
just
bit of a.
it was kind of based on what we talked about before we started recording. So I would say a natural lifter technically needs more volume, right? Because, and I'm going partly on a strength thing, or we'll say an advanced lifter might need less, right? Because they're using more weight, so they don't technically need as many working sets. And I would say same with a natural lifter. You, in most commercial gyms that you go to, you see younger natural guys doing endless amounts of sets of these things that most of it's just total junk volume. And they could really cut down on that and just, achieve the stimulus and go home and focus on recovering and growing versus spending hours in the gym, right? Their cortisol is going to be elevated at a different level than someone on drugs. Their adaptive responses will be very different. Their strength, because most likely a natural lifter outside of world-class athletes is going to be very different from an enhanced lifter. But yeah, I mean, I would love to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, so I'm within the same kind of realm of how you see it. I think a drug-free lifter definitely does require more volume, generally speaking. But like you pointed out, as you become very advanced drug-free lifter, if you get to that point where your strength to body mass ratio is very disproportionate, like you're saying, like if you're squatting, say, 500 plus pounds for reps, and you're, say, around 200, 220 pounds, that's a lot of systemic fatigue, a lot of axial loading that you're getting. And so I think in that instance, when you become super advanced as a drug-free lifter, and I've noticed this just through observation with people I've worked with, some of my drug-free clients, and also some of my friends who are pro-natural, lifetime natural bodybuilders, and they've had to slowly taper their volume back as they've gained more lifting experience there into their kind of their second decade of drug-free
Mhm.
lifting, and they're at the peak of their field, like of their categories in what they compete in. And yeah, when you're a beginner, you don't need much stimulus because it's all new. So yeah, you don't need as much volume. Then as you become more experienced, you progressively, gradually need more and more volume to push the envelope more and more, and then it starts to taper off again. So it's almost like a bell curve.
Mhm.
Yeah, it almost comes back around full circle. And then I find drug enhanced lifters, like people who do leverage performance enhancing drugs, they can handle more volume. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need more volume. They can recover better because the parameters are wider for them. They have drugs at their disposal to elevate their recoverability, and that can be a benefit or of detriment depending on how
Mhm.
that person approaches their training.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that. I think part of the formula that a lot of people miss too is volume. Weight is included in the volume formula, right? It's reps times sets times load, and people leave the
Yeah.
load out. So, and when you gave the example squat, so that's about right, like 220, 2.25, and my last set of squats is about 500 pounds. So I don't do as many total sets, but technically my volume is still probably equated to someone who's squatting 225 at a max that does 6 or 7 sets. I might only need 3 sets because my load is much higher. And it's the amount of working sets actually goes down generally as someone gets more advanced, not goes up. At least that's what I found. Right. And for me, part of the goal of progressing someone to becoming advanced is also become more efficient in their exercise. That shouldn't take them. I don't think as you get better, you should be spending longer and longer and longer in the gym. Is that really the point to being in the gym? Spend your whole life working out?
Definitely
I think
not.
you can become more efficient with these things, right? And learn what movements work and then get out of the gym.
That's
What?
one thing that I'm very grateful about powerlifting, having a powerlifting background, is that's something that it definitely taught me, like quality over quantity. And I'm not one of those. I can't even think of his name right now. Mike Metz zealots. Like I'm not a hit training zealot. Like I don't think that that's the way. But I definitely do think there's some truth in that, and that quality does trump quantity to a point.
Yeah, no, I'm not, and I'm not. Mike Menzer went a little nuts at the end. I'm not backing up Mike
Yeah.
Menzer per se. I just think there's a lot of junk that people are counting it toward work, and it's not necessarily work.
Yeah.
So with that, who do you believe needs to push harder during each set? Like who requires that stimulus more so, a natural or
Definitely
enhanced lifter?
natural. Definitely.
Cool, I would agree with that, right? Because like we said, they require that stimulus in order to grow versus an
Yeah.
enhanced lifter. Not that they don't need the mechanical tension, but they've already have the IGF and all those things going on at a much elevated level that a natural lifter doesn't have. So the working set is not going to do as much. So when we see coaches online reaching, I'm not necessarily taking a stance. I think everything is nuanced, like you said, but I think when you see online coaches that are clearly enhanced talking about the need to stay away, very far away from failure, right, and just add more sets, that's from an enhanced point of view. That's not necessarily the technique you would use if you had an 18-year-old kid that was not on drugs. How are you going to train with them? They're most likely, they'll get a response like you said in the beginning, but then it'll level out really fast.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, every drug-free lifter that I've known, successful drug-free lifters, that is, like pro natural bodybuilders at the world level, they train balls to the walls. Like you would think that you're watching blood and guts with the way that they train. They're not doing 1 rep in reserve or 2 reps in reserve, but they're also executing with so much precision that when they hit failure, it is true failure. It's not just I'm going to let my technique get sloppy and
Yep.
just keep going and going and going. Like every repetition literally looks like clockwork, and they are pushing it to the limit. And I mean, I've seen this with a lot of drug-free lifters that eventually go enhanced. They try maintain that same execution. They start getting injured a couple of years into enhanced lifting because you're just so much more neurologically efficient when you're enhanced. You can't train to absolute failure. Take Dorian Yates, for example. He just got injury after injury toward the end of his career, and he's even self-admitted in interviews later on down the track that he would approach it differently had he the ability to do it over again. He
Yeah.
realizes that he probably didn't have to push himself as hard in the end as he did, and probably could have gotten away with less injuries and niggles as a result of that. But yeah, 100% on board with you. 100%. I think drug-free lifters need to push it to the absolute limit and sometimes even beyond.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, enhanced lifters, they can get away. They honestly, enhanced lifters could probably do 30 to 40% load and grow from that.
Yep. I think I was just going to clarify one thing. I'm not disagreeing with the statement beyond failure. I just want to clarify for people what failure is. So failure in an exercise is considered task failure. It's when you can no longer completely complete the task. So in something like a leg extension, a seated leg extension, it's really obvious when failure occurs. It's when you can no longer get your below the knee parallel to the ground. When that occurs, it means you've hit failure. If you start to arch your back or you start to scoot your butt forward, that's not that you're when the set starts to get ugly, you're probably already past failure or you're you've already hit failure. You're now using other leverages to make that rep occur. That's not taking anything past failure. This is where it gets confusing. It's like saying, I'm going to put 110% effort into something. There's no such thing. 100 is the max. So once you've hit failure, you really can't go past it. You can change mechanical leverages or your form in order to accomplish more reps out of something, but you're technically not past it. Doing a forced rep where someone's helping you, technically the leverage the other person's supplying is helping you. You're not actually going, you know what I mean? You're at 100%. You can't go beyond. So
Yeah,
I think what you're saying is an enhanced lifter can use techniques to continue to do drop sets or rest pause or these other static holds, force negatives, these advanced techniques if they see fit, where a natural lifter would be out of their mind to try to do that stuff. That's not going to cause any positive adoption. There's no study to show that doing drop sets causes more growth than not doing a drop set. A straight set within proximity of failure will cause as much adoption as set then dropped.
Yeah,
it doesn't make a difference. Once you've hit that point, you can't turn the thermometer, you can't turn the dial anymore.
For drug-free lifters, that's a good distinction to make. Actually, when I say beyond failure, I guess I'm more suggesting most people I see in the gym train like pussies, and they probably need to train to what they would think in their mind is beyond failure, but it's in fact actually just failure. Yeah,
which just starts to get ugly, right? And that's when injury occurs. Is when your form breaks. Is that's when people get hurt.
Yeah, exactly. So like
protein intake.
Yeah,
tell me about protein intake. What do you think, enhanced lifter or natural lifter? Who needs more protein?
I'd say deficit, surplus.
Just in general, who can assimilate more protein? Who do you think?
Okay, so an enhanced bodybuilder can obviously assimilate more protein, but in saying that too, when you're enhanced, feed efficiency increases, so you don't need as much because you can get more out of less. So I mean, it almost probably balances itself out. So as a drug-free lifter, you need like a little bit more protein in the sense that you're not going to be able to assimilate as much protein, but you're also not going to require as much because your ability to build tissue isn't as I suppose elevated as an enhanced lifter. So it's like you need more to be able to assimilate the same amount of protein, but you can't assimilate as much protein. So whereas an enhanced lifter, you have this increased feed efficiency, so you can get more protein assimilation out of less total grams per day, but you also have elevated MPS. So it's kind of like, I think those two things cancel each other out. You'll find that protein requirements are probably pretty identical among natural and enhanced, but I'd say that the only time having a higher protein intake would be advantageous is when you're doing, say, 2-a-day sessions and your fatigue that you're accumulating or the amount of damage that you're causing to your body is so systemically high that you probably require additional protein for other functions, physiological functions in the body aside from just MPS.
Okay. I mean, technically, the only physiological difference is where a natural lifter would probably do better with slightly larger bolus spaced a little farther out every 4 to 5 hours to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Otherwise, they become very efficient at turning protein into glucose.
Carbohydrates.
Whereas an enhanced lifter can get by with slightly more frequently, and they're just feeding the machine. That would be the only other difference I could think of. In theory, technically, an enhanced lifter can put to use more protein, right? Like a natural lifter might need more because they're going to oxidize more and they might waste more, but actual put to use to grow more muscle, like a 300-pound IFBB pro, pound for pound, can eat a lot more meat than a natural guy.
Yeah.
You know, it's similar. Not that there's going to be a natural guy with a similar amount of muscle mass, but I guess if two people are roughly equated in size, the natural guy might need to eat more protein to get a result, but can't utilize as much protein. But there's going to be a lot more weight. So in a natural lifter, only 10% of protein goes toward muscle, whereas in a enhanced lifter, it depends on what the drug is, and that's where it also gets nuanced too. So drugs like Trenbolone don't require more protein intake because they technically. Trenbolone in a normal sane dose does not actually elevate protein synthesis at all. It just stops protein breakdown. So if someone were to leverage something like Tren, assuming that there was some amount of estrogen as a base in there somewhere to be remotely healthy, they wouldn't need to eat as much like you're talking about because of feed efficiency versus someone if they're just leveraging Dianabol that's going to rely more so on protein synthesis than protein breakdown. And then we could talk about calories. So who would need to eat more calories? Again, this is probably nuanced response depending, right? What do you think about calories?
Yeah, I've seen it on both sides. I've seen some drug-free lifters that do require more calories just to be able to even gain. But then I've also seen very similar things in enhanced lifters. I think it's more individual specific rather than whether you're natural or enhanced. But I'd say in general, enhanced people can get away with slamming more calories. Natural people are going to be more prone or susceptible to storing those calories as body fat. So I think drug-free lifter should be more conservative with the calorie surplus size, and then an enhanced lifter, they don't necessarily need to have a bigger surplus or much greater than a natural, but they will get away with it, and their body will probably be more adaptive in terms of the like metabolic adaptation that occurs. So they're probably going to have increased turnover in thermic effective food, also just the ability to not store that as body fat due to the other processes that are going on in the body. Having high androgen levels in general is just going to cause you to petition those nutrients better.
Yep. Yeah, I would say the same thing, that it totally depends on the person and the situation. Whereas a natural person probably doesn't need, on average, as much of a surplus to grow, right? Because they're not going to be able to use all those extra calories as efficiently as an enhanced lifter. An enhanced lifter could probably get by eating more in a growth phase than a natural lifter because they could utilize the calories better, especially if they're using things like growth hormone and insulin. They can shuttle the nutrients to where they need to go instead of laying them on as fat, right? And with the diet, the guy on drugs can definitely get by with eating less. He also might not need to eat less. But if you look at like Chris Bumstead's diet before the Olympia, I think he was down to 1,300 calories or something. There are not many 250-pound natural guys, sounds like an oxymoron, that can eat 1,300 calories and hold their muscle mass. It's just not going to happen, right? Where a natural guy probably need 3,000 calories to hold stuff without losing tissue. Guys like that are able to really push the food deficit or the calorie deficit really hard and still come out looking okay, versus you'd be a stringy mess. You'd probably lose more muscle than fat at a certain point.
Natural lifters can't get away with aggressive fat loss phases as well as enhanced lifters. Yeah.
So with that, cortisol, who do you think would need to be more concerned with cortisol levels?
Natural lifters.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Steroids are basically, this is a simple one. Steroids are basically going to, for the most part, they all have some role in minimizing that. There's varying degrees, right? Testosterone's not, we'll do it to a little bit, Trenbolone will do it to a much greater degree. D-ball, Dianabol will do it. Anavar will do it. Nandrolone. Yeah. So varying depending on what it is. Versus some other ones like Primobolan leverage more the other way. They leverage more protein synthesis, right, than cortisol. Who should probably take more concern with vitamins and minerals and supplements and like that stuff for their health?
I'd say in some cases enhanced lifters, and in other cases drug-free lifters. So for drug-free females, I'd say definitely probably want to leverage those, especially in a fat loss phase where calories are very low. The ability to get sufficient micronutrients from their diet is probably going to be minimized. Okay. And so in order to ensure that they don't develop any malnourishment in a calorie deficit, it's probably wise for them to supplement and complement their diet as it progressively gets lower and lower in calories toward the end of a dieting phase or a contest prep with more vitamins and minerals. An enhanced lifter, I think that they probably have higher requirements for certain vitamins and minerals, and therefore, generally speaking, enhanced lifters probably need more, but there are certain instances where I think drug-free lifters do require more. Say tail end of a contest prep where they're just not really eating many calories and they have to be more, I suppose, selective with their foods in order to meet their macronutrient targets while not exceeding their calorie target. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a better response. I was only looking at it one-sided. I guess that makes sense from a growth point of view or from a dieting point of view. It's very possible that the natural lifter might need more to leverage something out of it. I was just thinking from like a stress and health point of view. I was just going to say I thought enhanced lifters, right? Because the extra stress they're putting on their bodies, and it's something unfortunately you don't see a lot of, right? Like I know a lot of. It makes sense. I see a lot of natural guys that take much better care of their bodies than I do enhanced lifters. I see lots of guys that push levels of androgens really high, and they don't take any vitamins or minerals or fish oil. They take no, right? They just eat. And the food tends to be very bland and devoid of anything. Like eating chicken or rice 6 meals a day isn't really supplying your body with anything outside of energy and protein.
Not even fiber. A lot of them are deficient in fiber. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with me. Enhanced lifters who are skipping the vegetables, their fruits, not taking the vitamins, minerals, they're accumulating so much oxidative stress from all different angles. And then they're not getting adequate fiber, so their gastric motility is impaired, and they'll start getting backed up, potentially constipation, GERD, stuff like that. And they don't realize a lot of the time that their minimalistic approach to their diet is the cause for a lot of their digestive distress and issues, as opposed to them thinking that it's from eating foods that set them off. It's more so eating the same foods repetitively and not having any variety, not getting any soluble, insoluble fiber or adequate antioxidants from eating their fruits and their vegetables. And then if they were to just add more variety and slowly integrate small amounts of different foods, they'd probably find that their overall digestion improves, their overall health markers improve.
Yeah, it's also when when enhanced bodybuilders push the calories up, right? They tend to be more extreme with that. They then tend to reduce the fiber, reduce the fruit, reduce the vegetables, because it's near impossible to eat enough at a certain point if you're getting too much fiber, because then you're full all the time. Right? Super common thing. And one of the other things that occurs is excess estrogen is eliminated through the bowels. So when your fiber intake is really low, your body can't clear estrogen properly, and then it hydroxylates back through the liver, and it can cause other problems, potentially things like colon cancer. So it's I think just important for everyone should be taking care of their health, but I think enhanced lifters should probably focus a little more on that stuff, not just on the drugs.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that, especially the colon cancer and the bowel cancer situation. It's so much more likely for an enhanced lifter who's getting insufficient fiber.
Yeah. The last one I thought was kind of interesting was, we'll call it majoring in the minors. And I kind of touched on this before. So you go to the gym and it's a shoulder day for you. You might be able to get away with a press, an upright row, a lateral raise, a front raise, some rear delts, right? You could spend 45 minutes, an hour just doing shoulders versus a natural lifter. What do you think? I would call that majoring in the minors. And I see this a lot. You see these guys that weigh 130 pounds, 140 pounds in the gym. They're 16 years old and they're doing 10 sets of lateral raises, right? Most likely with too much weight as well. They're probably trying to swing 40-pound dumbbells. Who do you think should focus less on those things and probably just focus more on basic movements?
Drug-free lifters, definitely.
Cool. It's kind of funny, right? Because I feel like you learn that, I think, not all the time. I think a lot of times in gyms, as guys progress, and then they become enhanced, they've learned more about how their body works and what they should be doing and what works and what doesn't work. I feel like you generally don't see those guys doing as many goofy things, like using the appropriate amount of weight. You and I, we were doing a video the other day and they were talking about, you guys were talking about lateral raises with the little kids swinging 60-pound dumbbells or whatever. For lateral raises, you're using the 15s, but also just the volume, right? You see this the most ridiculous thing, like 40 sets of bicep curls for a kid that's got 14-inch arms. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Cool. That was really all I had for those. Thanks again, Nick, for coming on. It's always a blast to talk to you.
I appreciate it, mate. Really do.
I'll put Nick as a coach. Obviously, I'll put his link tree and stuff down below if you want to reach out to him or follow him on Instagram or his YouTube channel. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.